What's up, everybody? After the exciting emergency pod last night, all today has been news item after news item for the Buffalo Bills, and it really comes into to a head here in the last hour as the Bills are making a huge change on the defensive side of the ball, sending Kaiir Elam, former first-round pick, to the Dallas Cowboys. We'll get into the details of that, some of the new pieces that the Bills have added today, an old name back in the mix, a ton to talk about. This is Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast on this Wednesday, March 12th. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. What is up, Ryan Talbot?
And, not too much. Like you said, a pretty hectic day. It's funny. Yesterday, I was texting you in the afternoon. I said, man, pretty boring day 2 of legal tampering. And then obviously things picked up later in the evening. Today, it's been move after move after move, news. So I have to tip my cap to Brandon Beane. He has been very active. He's been very busy trying to address a lot of the needs that this team has before going into the draft.
So let's get started on the Kaiir Elam move, because I think for a lot of people, getting the kind of return that the Bills did here was something that I don't know if people thought Brandon Beane would be able to get. And I think when you're talking to teams about trading him, and the reports are out there that this has kind of been quietly percolating between Elam's camp and the Bills over the last couple of weeks, you wonder if you're not going to find a taker that's willing to, knowing that you're kind of looking to move on, you might not be able to get this kind of return. And what the return is a 5th round pick in this year's draft for one of the Bills' 6th round picks. And it is 34 picks in improvement from, according to Joe Biscaglia, the 6th rounder from the Cowboys going to the Cowboys is pick number 204 for the Bills. The Bills move all the way up to 170 in the 5th round, in that 5th rounder from the Cowboys. That's almost a full round pick swap, Ryan. So you're getting a chance to move up 34 spots in the draft. You're moving off of a player that, for whatever reason, has not been able to find a sustainable role in this defense under multiple regimes. I mean, you go back to Leslie Frazier year 1. Then it goes to Sean McDermott as the defensive coordinator, and then Bobby Babich. And they obviously moved some pieces last year with John Butler moving on, bringing in Jamil Adai, and nothing really ever clicked for Kaiir Elam. This is a chance for him to go somewhere else, start anew in a fresh environment.
And you could tell Jamil Adai was trying to coach him up last season, really trying to maybe restore some value there, show that maybe he could play for this team, but it just never worked out. He could never beat out the competition for the jobs there. From year 1, Christian Benford outshined him, obviously, same draft class and a much different gap between where each were selected. You had Rasul Douglas 2 years ago at the trade deadline. He's there last year. The opportunity just never kind of arose for him to get those opportunities. But then when there were injuries and he had to come in a pinch hit type situation, he usually struggled more than he succeeded between the AFC Championship game, falling all over that field, really struggling in coverage. The Jacksonville game a few years back too, really struggled there in London. There were good moments. There were interceptions against the Chiefs, against the Dolphins. There was certainly some good, but a fresh start was absolutely needed for Kaiir Elam and for the Buffalo Bills. You mentioned all the different coaches, whether it's DCs or secondary coaches. They just couldn't make this work. From day 1, it wasn't a great scheme fit. The Bills aren't 100% zone or anything of the sort, but this was a man defense player in college to a team that played a lot of zone. You figured there'd be a little bit of a transition, but it just never clicked for whatever reason. To get the picks that you did, and again, I'm not trying to overhype these picks. The Bills should be thrilled. Bills fans should be absolutely thrilled to get a 5th rounder. I know you're sending one of your 6th back in return for that, as well as a 7th rounder as well. And is it next year's draft for the 7th rounder? That's a good return on a player that you probably were going to have trouble getting onto the field. Could have been a roster cut at the end of the summer. We know the way that Brandon Beane has found a lot of gems in those mid rounds. So we've talked about moving up and down the draft. That's another asset for him to maybe use to try to trade up at some point in this 3-day draft coming up in April.
Yeah, the more ammo that you add if you're Brandon Beane, the better off you'll be in the lead up to the draft and maybe even potentially any big time swings that you want to take beforehand. The more picks that you have in your collection, the more aggressive that you can be. The other part of this trade that's really important is it opens up 2.57 million in cap space right now as the Bills kind of continue to work some things in. They bring in 2 more players today, one day after the big Joey Bosa bomb. And I want to get to Larry Ogunjobi, and we're going to talk about him in quite a bit and what it means for this Bills defensive line. But before we move off of Elam, I think the next part of this conversation is now what remains on the Bills roster at cornerback. You have Christian Benford as the starter, somebody that could very well get a big time extension here any day, or maybe even sometime this summer. We'll see how that continues to progress. But beyond him, it's Jamarcus Ingram on the boundary, and that's about all you have. I know a lot of fans have asked, can Daquan Hardy be somebody that they move on out to the outside? I'm not ruling that out completely, but he was almost a slot-only cornerback in college. Obviously has a little bit of the return chops. They went out and they got Codrington, who filled in that role pretty nicely last season. So cracking a roster spot this year is going to be tough for Daquan Hardy. I think the Bills have to go out and be aggressive in on the veteran market. There's a couple of names for me. One that you mentioned already multiple times, Jonathan Jones. There's Asante Samuel Jr. that's still kind of sitting out there. Whoever the Bills end up, tabbing, and maybe it ends up being Rasul Douglas. If he doesn't have the kind of market, you can get him back on a really cost effective contract. The Bills are going to have to do something at the cornerback spot because they're very, very much depleted of talent at that spot right now.
Very thin there right now. More of a concern, a much bigger concern, even than the one tech position that we've been pounding the table for. And I'm not saying the Bills need to go into the draft and take a cornerback in the first round, one in the second round, or anything like that. But they're probably going to want to double dip at corner at some point in this draft class. But you do need to add a veteran presence or two, some competition. That's why I've sat here and said, not for competition for cornerback too, but pure depth. A guy like Dane Jackson, who is already in the system, I would not mind coming back on a very cheap deal. You've mentioned Trey White on a very cheap deal, a vet minimum type deal. Those are players I'm fine bringing in to be in the mix for depth if an injury happens in season. You still want to have that veteran, a guy that you think still has gas in the tank. And you mentioned some names already in free agency. And maybe that's the trade market. Maybe they're not going to go out and they're definitely not going to go out and swing a trade for an edge rusher now, in my opinion. Maybe they go out and they swing a trade for a player entering the final year of his rookie deal elsewhere in this league that I think is going to be a really good fit in their system, or a veteran that is at odds with the team or not on a competing team. That might be the play as well, but they definitely need to address it. Get a cornerback earlier in the draft, maybe, with one of their first 3 picks, and go from there. And then I think you're going to feel a lot better about that position.
Yeah, I think cornerback definitely is a priority in this draft. Even with 10 picks, if you end up making 8 of those, you figure you come out of this with a couple of defensive tackles, an edge rusher, a wide receiver, a cornerback or 2, a safety, throw that in there as well, maybe a punter with one of those late round picks if you want to get the cream of the crop, although they've gone that route before. I don't know if they need to necessarily do that. I think they could probably find somebody on the undrafted free agent market at punter to bring in his competition or a veteran or something like that. There's a lot of ways that you can go about this. The Bills have some holes to fill. And that's the thing. Like, Brandon Beane's been so aggressive here early on. The work that they did in the lead up to free agency to open up some cap space so they can be a little bit more aggressive than I think anybody thought. A swing on an edge rusher at 12 million, coming back at 10 million for Larry Ogunjobi, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. I mean, the Bills are spending some money here to try to fill some important pieces on their roster, both sides of the ball. And the biggest splash arguably was Josh Palmer at the 3 years and 36 million that they handed out to him on the first day of the legal tampering period.
Yeah, definitely the biggest splash there. And you saw the extensions to free up some cash at Oliver. Today it was reported restructured his deal, saving over or giving the Bills about $10 million in cap space to work with. So those are the levers that we've talked about that they could pull. And I've mentioned Deion Dawkins by name, the extension of Josh Allen, how much that can free up that they've already done. And the list goes on of all the different extensions. So they're definitely freeing up some space, and you've seen it in those splash signings, 3 for 36, 12.6 million for Bosa. They're not being shy about some of these deals. They're paying these free agents pretty well. It's not like they're not bargain hunting at the end of wave 3, wave 4. They're going out and attacking some of these players in positions of need.
All right, so Larry Ogunjobi is the newest addition at defensive tackle for the Buffalo Bills. He signs a 1-year deal, according to Ian Rappaport, worth $8.3 million. $8 million of that is guaranteed. So this is a legitimate piece that the Bills are
making the
adding.
roster.
He's making the roster, exactly. $10 million contract total with incentives, so that can go up if he's able to perform this season. There's a lot to kind of get into here. He will be 31, I believe, before the start of the season, maybe 30. I'll look that up as we're talking here. And it's been a little bit of a downturn in terms of his career in Pittsburgh after a really good start in Cleveland, and then his career season in Cincinnati when he put up 7 sacks, 12 tackles for a loss, was a really big part of that defense the one season that he was there. But the one real difference between Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, those first 4 seasons, he played in a 4-3 scheme, which is he's returning to in Buffalo. The last couple, it was a 3-4 scheme that didn't necessarily fit his play style. He is a 3 technique, kind of like a tweener, if you will. You go back and watch those Cincinnati games, even the playoff game where he got hurt in that game against the Raiders. He played a little bit one technique-ish at times when they moved him inside to eat double teams. He can do that. It's in his game. But he's going to be more of that maybe Ed Oliver backup role. And you start to wonder, like, there's some pressure being applied to Dwayne Carter, because not only is Ogunjobi in the mix, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm imploring that the Bills do this, and going out and getting a 3 technique, even though you have Ed Oliver on the roster for the next couple of years, continue to build that position, because you really can't have enough when you run the kind of rotation system the Bills do.
Yeah, you mentioned the key stat there about Ogunjobi, and that's the 3-4 versus the 4-3. He did perform very well in 4-3 schemes, which he'll be playing it here in Buffalo. So you're hoping he can revert to form and show that he can still really contribute in that system. Primarily a 3 tech, can play a little bit of 1 tech, not someone that you want playing significant snaps as a 1 tech, obviously. But you do like the depth behind Ed Oliver. That's why in my article for Targets, I mentioned Calais Campbell is someone that the Bills should realistically look at. And this is, a veteran that we mentioned on Monday night, actually, after the release was announced, that, that's someone that they could bring in for depth. So it makes sense there. The only pushback I'll have with you, Matt, is maybe it's not so much putting any kind of heat on Dwayne Carter. I can't remember the exact wording you used. I think that this could really actually benefit him, because it's another veteran presence that he can learn from. I think there were a lot of expectations for Carter last season. He had some flashes, but then it just went awry for him after that injury. The wrist injury never quite looked the same or looked right. This allows him to kind of be eased into the rotation, not being counted on too much to be that D tackle two behind Oliver. And because this is a 1-year deal, this is the Bills saying, okay, this is your 2nd year in the system. This is a chance for you to get right, build up your frame, your muscle mass, all of that. And then year 3, that's going to be your job, essentially, to lose that DT2 behind Ed Oliver. This is a chance for you to really get prepared for that, because the rookie season did not come close to meeting expectations.
Yeah, and I think that, listen, Brandon Beane's always going to try to create competition.
Right.
But I wonder now what the approach is. They need a bigger body guy to go along with these 3 techs that they've kind of collected in Carter, Ogunjobi, and Oliver, right? Like Daquan Jones, 317 pounds, is kind of like an undersized 1 technique. And I think at this stage in his career, he's almost trending a little bit more towards somebody that you want to be able to be more of a pass rusher than a space eater, somebody consistently asking, those joints, those knee joints and the muscles, getting older, man, like holding up in there against a couple of 300-pounders down in and down out. That takes a lot off of you. And, we talk so much about Kenneth Grant. There's a bunch of other players that we're going to get into on the defensive tackle front the Bills can look to add. But Ogunjobi, factors into the mix. And I think that, like, I want to temper expectations because we're talking about Kaiir Elam and a disappointing rookie season. I wouldn't put Dwayne Carter in that mix, but he did have an up and down first year. And when you're trying to build out the most important group on your roster, you unfortunately don't have the same kind of runway that you do in other years of this build when you're trying to kind of build up. For a guy like Kaiir Elam can get a little bit more leeway over time because you have other options. You have veterans like Tre'Davious White. You go out and you trade for Rasul Douglas. Right now, Larry Ogunjobi, like, it's a nice addition, but I'm not like jumping to the moon or anything over this. This isn't something that, from people that I've talked to in Pittsburgh that have covered him, injury liabilities, a lot in the same kind of category as Joey Bosa, spent a lot of time on the injury report last year, played the majority of the games. But, when you're dealing with that week in and week out and you're not getting any younger, that's a concern as well. And Dwayne Carter, as good as he was before the injury, getting that injury and then being unavailable after the fact, it's just something that kind of raises your eyebrows. And as they build this thing up, you're still wondering, even though they've thrown a couple bodies at a couple problems, have they found any answers? That's going to be a question that we're asking all the way up through training camp in the preseason.
100%. Last thing on Ogunjobi, he does fit from the culture perspective. Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for Pittsburgh last year. He's going to come in, be a good locker room guy. We know how much culture means to Sean McDermott and company.
Joseph Curtis is a big fan of the way that you say Camp Bell.
I'm trying to correct it, though. I've had enough.
Don't
Campbell.
You dare.
Campbell.
Listen.
Look at that.
I talk to my kids about this all the time. You be you. And people are going to like
just
you.
Just mispronounce names.
Falcons, Campbell, do it all.
Yeah.
I like it all.
Yeah.
I like a little bit of a different flavor on here every now and again.
It's the Salamanca accent that I grew up with. That's what I'll. Yeah.
2,500 watching live across all platforms. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel as well on YouTube. Hit that little ding, that little bell. It'll give you a ding every single time we go live, so you can catch the latest and greatest episode of Shout. All right, next up, the Bills have added an interesting depth safety option, and it's Darrick Forrest, former fifth-round pick out of Cincinnati for the Washington Commanders. Actually had himself a pretty good season in 2022. Yes. Started 11 games. They had a lot of talent in that secondary room, and after that, it's been hard for him to get back on the field. But everywhere you look, whether it be fans, people that have covered the Commanders, the consensus is it's a bit of a puzzle why Forrest, after that really big breakout season in 2022, was never able to kind of get back into the good graces. Coaching change, that had partly probably to do with it. And this last iteration of the team with Dan Quinn, he was just kind of on the outside looking in. The Bills, we don't have the contract number yet, I don't believe, unless you saw it. This is probably a low-key deal. You bring in a guy that expectations don't have to be that large, because I put this out in the insider text line. You don't want another Mike Edwards situation where you go out and you bring in a top 3 or 4 free agent on the market who has expectations of starting. Forrest is going to come in here and compete for a job and playing time and all that, but I think the expectations might be a little bit lower. But if he blows you away and somehow earns a job, that's a really good under-the-radar get for Bean if this thing turns into something.
Yeah, absolutely. He did have a really good 2022 season. Went on the IR in October of 2023 with a shoulder injury, and then obviously last year, a new scheme, Joe Witt Jr. just didn't kind of fit into their puzzle for whatever reason, but he really did have some nice splash plays. One of the first people to react to the news was Cameron Curl, former teammate of his in Washington, that is now with the Rams. And his comment was, I know he's going to go crazy. My dog just needed a fair chance. A fair chance is a, interesting wording, I would say.
It's funny listening to you say my dog. You kind of sound
my
like
dog.
Sami Zayn a little bit.
Yeet.
I'll
do that too. I'll do the whole Jey Uso.
fits the Bills from what they look for in terms of just athletes. He tested extremely well when he came into this league. He was a 9.63 relative athletic score out of 10. So we know how much the Bills love athleticism at that position. Fared very well there. So there's, it's very interesting to see that he has performed well. One person on
I'm going to pull this up right now. Marcus Whitman. He does a lot of tape and things like that on YouTube and other sites. Darrick, now this might be an overreaction because I think he is downplaying what Taylor Rapp meant to this defense. He wrote, Darrick Forrest is immediately the best safety on that roster, in my opinion. And the perfect scheme fit, getting back to playing more C4, C6 like he did. Love this for him and the Bills. Was very frustrated that the new regime in Washington didn't use him at all. So a lot of upside there. Don't want to hype this up too much. He's got to come in and show it, but maybe he's going to be one of those camp surprises that you and I are packed into that dorm room at St. John Fisher University talking about a few times per week in terms of the way that he's standing out there on the field. Never hurts to have quality depth and players that maybe will surprise you and be able to come in and win a job.
You recovered quickly there. I was about to hit you with a pause when you're talking about stuffing into a dorm room, but you came back. You recovered, so I appreciate that.
I did.
No, I think if you look at some of the highlights that have been posted about him, a couple things stand out. He's a very physical player, a willing tackler in the box to come up, put his helmet down, and try to lay the boom a little bit on a ball carrier. That's one piece. He played a lot of deep safety for them as well. So that's something that you think about, potential coverage ability on the back end, something that I think the Bills are always kind of looking for. And listen, with what they have on the roster right now, it's the great unknown of what's the step that you're going to see for Bishop in year 2. I think it's potentially huge, but he was injured and missed a lot of time. And that gives you pause for projecting anything crazy for him. You want to see him be able to sustain his level of play, not get injured for a couple of weeks, months into a season before you bank on consistent production from him. And then Taylor Rapp's got the same issue. Every single season he's been here, he's dealt with multiple injuries. So he seemed like much more of an Iron Man in LA. So I don't know what has transpired for him and if it's just maybe a little bit of bad luck. But I think Taylor Rapp not being available in that game probably puts him in a different line of sight for the Bills long-term in terms of relying on him to be a regular starter and somebody that you want to build around on that back end over the course of the season. I know that, we're going to talk about them bringing back Damar Hamlin in a second here. I still don't think safety early is off the table, Ryan. I don't think anything that they've done and I know there's probably other needs, but if you can go out there and get somebody that you believe in as a bona fide potential starter, day one starter at safety, I still don't think you should be anything on your roster should preclude you or make you hesitant in doing it.
Yeah. Best player available. There's going to be some really good safeties that could be available at pick 30 or their first pick of the second round. You don't rule players like that out just because you drafted Cole Bishop in the second round. You have Taylor Rapp and you've signed a few additions to the room in terms of depth and competition. This Bills roster needs to go out and pick those players that they think can help 2025, but more so and beyond in terms of what they bring to the table. And if you can get I use Brian Branch type of player at pick 30 over the second or the third or the fourth one tech in the draft class, maybe you do lean that way. And maybe a few corners go off the board and that becomes a more appealing position. You've got to trust your board. Brandon Beane always has. He's not going to deviate from the plan to kind of fill a need. He's going to go BPA, and that could lead to a safety early in this draft.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. There was so much news. We had to kind of catch up with an episode of Shout before we got too much further along here. Who knows what will happen later today. Keep it locked on the Shout for the latest and greatest coverage of the Bills. Hit that like button and subscribe on YouTube. We really appreciate it. Damar Hamlin, level of surprise. I want to talk about this, that he's back. I would say mine's pretty high. Out of 10 being absolutely shocked, I'd put it at about a 7 that Damar Hamlin is returning on a 1-year deal. Now, a couple of things at play here. Maybe he didn't see the kind of market that he was hoping for, and knowing the Bills scheme, knowing the fact that he can fit a role and make the roster very easily over here, it's easy to kind of settle back into that. But for the Bills, I thought it made a lot of sense with Cam Lewis on the roster, Rapp, and then Bishop, and then you bring in Forrest to just start anew there. And they decided not to do that. They're absolutely stocked with safety talent right now. Damar Hamlin back in the mix. What do you think?
You know, I was like 50-50 on whether he was going to come back. So I wouldn't say shocked. I would say that I didn't think it was a lock, though, whereas I thought at one point Ty Johnson was going to be a lock. I thought Mac Hollins was going to be a lock, so that one surprised me when he left. I was somewhere in the middle on him in terms of I didn't see him, you know, getting a big deal elsewhere. I thought Pittsburgh would be in play. He had always talked about wanting to play in Pittsburgh, and maybe they would make an offer. Maybe there would have been an offer out there where he would have felt, hey, I have an opportunity to truly win a starting job. That's not to say that won't happen in Buffalo. I think the Bills ideally, though, would like to go out and start Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop. And unless someone really, you know, blows them away at camp, that's kind of what they want to do. So this might settle him into more of a depth role, which is fine. So that's why I was moderately surprised. I thought maybe he'd find a better opportunity elsewhere, but that seems to not be the case.
Yeah, and there's also this weird conversation happening online about him, and I think partly because, listen, the last taste that he left in Bills fans' mouth wasn't a very good one, right? He wasn't great in the AFC title game. I think people were pretty resigned to the fact that they wanted the Bills to move on. I do think it's, you know, you got to remember how good he was in that Baltimore Ravens game, though, at the same time. With Taylor Rapp on the field, he had a huge game, and one of the plays of the game when he caused that fumble on the strip sack on Lamar Jackson, and then Von Miller turns around and runs it upfield. You got to get a handle on things over at the Talbot household, okay? Like, what in the world is going on? You got dogs on your lap. The cat runs up over your shoulder. You know, get it together, Talbot. What are you're running just a wild farm over there.
Animals love me, and Honey loves the camera, so she's always about it. She's actually extremely jealous, so when Reggie jumped up on my lap, she had to jump up here as well. Joelle's out doing something right now, so she can't give them the attention that they want. So right here, thank you. It is a great dog. I agree completely. I heard Mr. Parrino might be looking at another dog. Is that correct?
Ah, you heard wrong. You
on.
Passed along some really just horrible information. It may have come through on the insider text line from somebody that might live in my household. And what she does is she does this funny thing where she sends me a little clip from one of the rescues in town every day. And a little clip, I mean 7 to 8 dogs a day that she's sending me. And we're not getting another dog. We got little Walter. He gives us a run for our money. But no, we're not doing another dog.
All right. Fair enough.
All right. So back to Damar Hamlin. This weird kind of vibe that's happening online about, you know, people upset about him being brought back in the mix. I think you're looking at it wrong. Like, I think that in every scenario that you play out, Damar Hamlin's not a starter. And if he is a starter, then it means something really bad for for Cole Bishop, Taylor Rapp, or anybody else that they bring in the rest of this summer. I think it's an insurance policy. You know that you could put Damar Hamlin on the field and get a certain level of production. He's made big plays in big spots. And I think having that, it's the same thing that you bring up with Dane Jackson, right? If you were to bring him back in, I know there's going to be a percentage of Bills fans that are down on that addition because you're not getting necessarily the high-end production. But knowing that you could trust a guy to go in and fill in certain spots, I think that's really important.
It's huge because you don't know when you need that next man or the man after the next man up in this league. And the more depth you have, the better suited you are. Sometimes players surprise us. You know, we saw at the end of camps, Joe Andreessen come in and shine and earn a spot on this roster. But there was a time where there were a lot of injuries and you're like, man, what can Joe Andreessen really bring to the table? And he did step up when needed in the offseason, leading up to the season, earning a roster spot. You just never know until they get out there on the field. But if you have guys that have experience in this league as your third and fourth option, that's a lot better than the unknown.
Ralph Wilson Sr., one of our regulars in the YouTubes, dogs won't sign with the Parrinos, have to wait in line for hair brushing. Boom. Ba-dum-bum. Nailed it. Good job. All right, last thing before we get out of here on this Wednesday edition of Shout. Keep it locked in. If there's any big moves, we will be live later tonight. Hello. What's going on? Well, somebody's feeling better. How are you?
Hey, Kennedy.
So, Kennedy, what did you have this week? Do you remember? Why did you stay home from school?
Because I was sick.
With what?
The flu.
The flu. We have had the flu at home. Not feeling good, but I like that smile. No Motrin all day today, so I think we're kind of bouncing back here, huh? You feeling good? All right. All right. Go back upstairs. I love you. I'll be up with you in a few minutes. Bye, dear. All right. So, last thing I want to cover before we get out. You know, you got Honey over there. Kennedy's coming in. She must have saw or heard. Who knows? Josh Allen. We talked to him for the first time since the monster extension, the MVP award, all of that. And, you know, one of the big takeaways was him talking about on his end, the direction to his representatives to make sure that whatever deal they landed on once conversations started, it put the Bills in a position cap-wise to be able to spend. And whatever the deal was in 2025, it gave the Bills great cap relief to be able to give them some room to go out and make some moves. And he even commented like, listen, we've had a pretty good start in free agency already. So that continues to be the model for Allen, who's desperate to win a Super Bowl, is doing everything he can from a financial standpoint to position the Bills to be able to spend. And I think that's smart, but also I love what he said about, listen, I make all this money. What's $5 more million per season really going to mean for me in the end? You know, his means of living is what it is. He's not an overly flashy kind of guy, although I will say his dress game has gone through the roof since he met Haley. Right. The other part of it too is there's so many endorsements out there for him, and he's leaning into all of them. You think about Gatorade. I think there was another one that just was announced. He's starting his own production company.
Yeah.
It's just there's so many opportunities for him away from football that he's leaning into it to try to do kind of like the follow the blueprint that Tom Brady said all those years ago.
Yeah, you know, he's not hurting. Haley's not hurting. A big Hollywood star, her own beverage line that she just put out recently. I think they're doing okay. Like you said, a few $1 million aren't going to hurt. He has the right perspective in mind. Being a team first guy, saying he wants to be in Buffalo his entire career. A lot of really good things came out of it. Maybe my favorite part was the comment about Slick Rick and how he actually called to apologize about, you know, I didn't mean for all this attention to be brought upon you if it was overwhelming. And it just shows you that despite all of that money, all of the fame, he is just a humble guy. He is someone that does truly care about everyone in that building, from the mailroom all the way up to the very top.
I got to give a shout out to our good buddy, Del Reed, with one of the tweets of the year. Bills fan posted on Twitter, I wouldn't mind Stefon Diggs coming back to Buffalo if everything is worked out and if he is okay with the everybody eats mentality. And Del Reed with a classic just tweets back, you sure? ? Obviously a callback to Stefon Diggs' famous tweet right before he was traded to the Houston Texans when I think a fan said, Stefon Diggs is great, but Josh Allen doesn't need him to be great. And it was just kind of funny. I don't think the Bills are getting back in the Stefon Diggs business, though.
No, I would be very
Would that be very shocking to you?
Very shocking if that were the case.
All right. Very good. I'm going to let you get back to the farm there. Make sure that all the animals are in line. Thank you for watching Shot. We really appreciate you. Become an insider right now. We'll be hanging out all evening, answering questions, talking about all these moves. 716-528-6727. Send a text there. You get a 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month. After that, it's a cup of coffee, Talbot. Nothing too crazy. We don't want to put anybody in the poorhouse. Just like Josh Allen said, he wasn't trying to kill the Bills on the contract extension. The insider text line, we want it to be very affordable.
Yeah. Pass on a little Tim Hortons once a week, and you're set for before you know it, the entire year.
All right, we'll be back with any breaking news. We'll see you then. Enjoy your day, everybody. Take care.